Hello, fellow developers. This is Eder Ignatovic, your chair for the upcoming InfoQ Dev Summit in Boston. If you're looking to stay ahead on the critical topics like generative AI, security, modern web applications, and more, learn directly from over 20 senior software practitioners navigating this challenge as they share their experience and practical insights you can apply immediately. Plus, there is a plenty of time for you to connect with peers and speakers at your social events. InfoQ Dev Summit is brought to you by the team behind InfoQ and the QCon International Software Developer Conference. Find out more at devsummit.infoq.com. I'm looking forward to connecting to you in Boston this June. See you there.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the InfoQ podcast. I'm Thomas Betts, and today's guest is Nick Toon, who recently co-authored the book Architecture Modernization, Socio-technical Alignment of Software, Strategy, and Structure. At the recent Explore DDD conference, Nick's sessions were some of the most popular, with more people trying to sign up than the room could hold. And since there was clearly a lot of interest in the talk of architecture modernization, I thought it'd be great to get Nick on the podcast and allow the InfoQ audience to hear some of his ideas. So Nick, welcome to the InfoQ podcast.
Thank you.
So I think we can have the baseline that the subject of architecture modernization assumes that we have some amount of legacy software, legacy architecture. We're not talking about doing this for greenfield. And in most successful companies, that legacy software is also what allows them to be profitable. This is the stuff they built years ago, and now it's just running the business. And that can sometimes lead to a mindset of, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Why is it important for companies to invest in modernizing architecture?
Well, that's a good question, and maybe it's not sometimes. Sometimes it's not the software that makes a company successful. It's the brand reputation. You could have the worst product in your industry. You could have new competitors, new startups who are all building better products than you. But if people know your name, they've got a big investment with your company and your products, maybe you can still be a successful market leader, even in those kind of situations. But it's a very risky strategy. For a lot of companies, the more legacy you've got, the older the legacy gets. It slows you down from building new features and can make costs certainly more expensive. And it can also pose reliability risks as your business grows and you start to scale and build new features. You might be building on the foundations that were designed to support, one country, and now it's running in 5 or 6 countries, and suddenly the whole requirements, non-functional requirements, are completely different. So I think become unreliable. They can prevent your company from growing. It's definitely a situation I see a lot. Companies want to do things like move into new countries, support different customer segments, but it's just not possible with the tech, or it's too expensive to achieve that.
Yeah, I like the idea of looking at your risks. And if your company doesn't have any imminent risks right now, maybe it's fine. But if you can start to analyze and say, we can project that we're going to have some of these risks that we need to deal with in the next 2 years because we're on a platform that's retiring, or there's too many vulnerable packages we're pulling in, or whatever it is. Like sometimes you're built on a framework that is just getting out of support. So are you seeing companies that you work with looking at those risks when they're looking long-term and saying, okay, the way we need to address this is to look at our tech stack?
I think some yes and some no. I'm currently working for a French company called Payfit. And one thing I'm really enjoying about this company is they've recognized that where they want to be in a few years requires an investment and some big changes to the technology. And so, yes, I would say this company is very forward-looking, understands that investing in technology now can have big business benefits in the future. On the other side of things, I think there are some companies that just want to keep building features until they can't build features anymore, until things have totally broken, everything's failing, the system's not working, they can't build new features. They've got serious competition. It feels like in some companies, you have to be in a real crisis situation before they're like, okay, let's modernize. But to summarize, I think there is a mix. Some companies are very good at looking forward and some very short-term focused.
Yeah, you talked about that crisis, and that's when you make very reactive decisions. And what I think you're talking about for architecture modernization is let's look at what we have now and make a proactive plan that avoids those crisis moments. How do you recognize that those crises are going to show up? So how do we recognize what they are and find a plan to get away from it?
Yeah, definitely. One of my favorite questions as a consultant is, how long would you be a market leader, or how long could you keep your current position if you made no improvements in your tech? So it's kind of like, what happens if you don't modernize, basically? How long has your company got? Some companies are like, yeah, we have to do something now. Worked with one of the big companies, and Amazon entered that industry, and they were like, it's like, now the crisis is here now. We can't afford to wait at all. We should have started like 2 years ago. Some companies are like, yeah, we could probably go without doing anything for 18 months and still be the market leader, or 2 years. And I always think like, 18 months, 2 years is a good number actually, because it's far enough away that you're not being reactive, but it's kind of close where it's like, yeah, we do need to do something. And I think that's a good balance where you've got some pressure, but not too much pressure that you make bad decisions or you're looking for silver bullets, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I like that because I think a lot of companies tend to do 1 year planning and then they'll do longer 3 to 5 year planning. And that fits in that sweet spot of we don't need to deal with this right now. But if you know it's on the horizon, you start doing the advance work so that you avoid, oh, we only have 6 months to do the 18-month plan.
Yeah, definitely. If people feel like it's more than 2 years away, it's like, oh, yeah, don't need to worry about that. That we can do that next year.
Yep. Yep. That's definitely true. So let's say that we've got the company on board and they've decided we're going to do this modernization. It's a good idea. How do you get started? How do you look at all of the legacy systems you have and determine what do you need to prioritize?
Yeah, great question in terms of where to get started. A lot of different ways you can approach this, I think, and depending on the size of your company can also vary. I think if you go to the extreme approach in one side, you would spend all this time mapping out all of your systems, building up a full picture. You'll have every one of your systems, you'll have a full target architecture defined, you'll have a 3-year roadmap. That's probably a bit too much. I'm more on the side of try and deliver something in 3 to 6 months, do some assessment of the current state, talk to teams, get the information that they have available, but try and pick something that you can modernize in 3 to 6 months and it will give you some value. It's not a wasted project. It might not be the most important thing or the most valuable thing, but it would be in your top 5 to 10. So I would say try and get started early, validate some assumptions, try and start showing people that this is happening. You are delivering modernization, deliver some business wins. And then whilst you're doing that, you can be doing more discovery and mapping in other areas. I think most of the modernizations I work on is kind of a distributed nature. It's not like a centralized project. It's like we've got all of these teams and these teams are all going to be involved in modernization. And so some of the decision, it comes up to the teams themselves to decide how much effort they want to do. And if you're leading modernization, you might try and encourage certain teams to do more work, do more modernization work, do more discovery, and you might be happy for others to step back. And that can also be driven by the people involved. Your first modernization project to focus on, it might not be the area you think is best to modernize. It might be those are the right people to deliver the first piece. We'll modernize the bit that they worked on before. So we'll pick the right people to start modernizing. So yeah, difficult one to give a concrete answer, I think. But I would say having some overall mapping of the system at quite a reasonable level, at least understanding what are all of the different pieces of our architecture, and then also trying to deliver something in 3 to 6 months, having those two things pulling you in different directions, I would say.
Yeah, I think if you take that 18-month, 2-year mindset and you look at all the components of your system, all the big systems, all the small systems, you're probably going to see things that say, this is going to be a bigger problem if we don't address it in 18 months. And others like, well, it'd be nice to do, but it's going to take too long or it's not as much of a priority. And when you're saying pick something that you can do in 3 to 6 months, that kind of sets the mindset of let's show a quick win, relatively quick win, that we can do this architecture modernization. And does that help buy in with the company and the decision makers that now we can take on more, now we can start planning a more broad spread, we can apply this mindset of modernization to the rest of our tech stack?
Yeah, and I think there's different ways you can do that first 3 to 6 months. On one approach, it might be let's just pick this one thing and modernize it and show what's possible. But you could also have more of a narrative around that. So connecting the business strategy to the modernization, the tech strategy, you could have your system mapped out at a high level and you can say, we know the business is going in this direction where we want to move into multiple countries. And we know the current system is optimized for the current country we're in, but it won't support these 3 other countries. So at least you can say, we've got this overall strategy of being multi-country or multi-product, for example, and everything we do is connected back to that. It could be something else. It could be our focus is on more stability, or our focus might be on making our data more accessible so that we can feed it into LLMs and stuff. So having some narrative, so even though you haven't figured out the full modernization plan, at least you can connect everything back to this theme that your company's trying to achieve.
Yeah, when you're talking about, you mentioned feeding data into an LLM. That was probably not on anyone's roadmap 2 years ago. And now everyone's talking about we have to have an LLM somewhere in our system or we won't look like we're keeping up. And I think that gets to, this is not just a technical problem. This is a business problem. And if you have business requirements, like you said, we want to expand multinational, does our system support that? No. Well, where are the pain points going to be in getting to that and finding those things that you can say, we need to get to the business. We could just build something new, or we can take the time to modernize what we have. And that's going to set us up for more success. Have you seen that approach where somebody says, let's just do the new thing versus modernize the old thing?
I think this is quite a common thing, right? Should we do the new thing or should we modernize the old thing? I don't know. I think it depends, really. I'm not sure what to say on that one. Maybe if I reframe the question to, should you modernize the old thing or build the new thing? How would I go about making that decision? So I think building the new thing is good. Let's say you got an old tech stack, 10 years old, 20 years old, 30 years old, some legacy. The benefit of building something new is that you can start from a blank canvas and use all the latest technologies. And you can say, here's what good looks like. Here's the best possible thing that we can create in this company. That's the standard for everything we modernize. You want to get to this level. Sometimes I call that the new world and the old world. Like, here's what the new world looks like. We want to get all of the old world into this new world. And obviously you can get things out to market quicker with that approach. Caveat being, you might have to still talk to the legacy, or you might have to integrate with the legacy later. And that could be the legacy infrastructure. You build some stuff in the cloud on a test environment, but then it all has to connect back to the on-prem stuff. And it's like, yeah, building all of this stuff in the new world didn't get that much benefit anyway. But the other problem with that approach is you're not actually modernizing. You're not learning about how you modernize your system. Sometimes companies do all this new stuff, and it's like when they come to modernize, they realize, oh, it might not be possible to do that. We built this new thing in AWS Lambda on the cloud, but because of our network rules and other kind of policies, we're not going to be able to do that anyway. So if you do build something new, you're missing out on learning opportunities about how you actually start modernizing your legacy. Whereas if you start by modernizing something, you start building up this playbook and knowledge of how to modernize other things afterwards. So I think pros and cons with both approaches. I've seen both approaches being successful. If you can hedge your bets, that's always the best option, right? If you can do something new and start to modernize something else, then that's always helpful. You get the best of both.
Somebody gave the house analogy one time for building something new. And it's like, do you want to remodel what you have and you get to keep living in it and it's going to be disruptive while all these contractors are showing up and building out the new kitchen? Or are you going to build a new house down the street? And when it's done, now you have to figure out how to move everything out of your old house and into the new house. And it's two very different mindsets. And it's like, well, you're throwing away all of the benefits of the old house. You've lived there for years. You have, well-established routines. Your stuff fits in all the places. And now you have to find new places to store everything. So when you say that there's pros and cons to both, yeah, most people can see that for non-software problems where you're looking at, do we change what we have or do we build something new? When you say hedge your bets, the idea of building something new, you said that creates a new world like standard, like this is what it's going to be. Would you see that as the same functionality of what you have in the legacy system or something that you don't have yet, just to show here's an example of what the architecture looks like?
Yeah, good question. So it can be either this new world concept. I think the new world concept is something that can really blow people away. You might have people who don't work in tech more on the business side, and they've got used to deploying once every 6 weeks or once a month. They've got used to all of this bureaucracy. They've got used to developers deploying on weekends and doing like 3 days of regression tests after every deployment, and they think that's normal. Even if you build something new, that's new functionality in this new world, and they can see like, oh wow, we're deploying a day, all the tests are automated, we've got our compliance baked in. That's amazing. Yeah, it's like you want to blow their minds basically, but it could also be existing functionality as well. But I think, yeah, it depends on what projects come up in your roadmap and what learnings and what effect you want to have with that new world. Because if you get this amazing new world, but then the next step is you can't actually get your existing system to look like that, things can fall apart at that point. So you want to be able to blow people away, but be able to back that up.
Well, since you talked about releases, that got to one of my next questions, which was how do you measure success? And I think you hinted at this a little bit when you were first talking about why do you want to do architecture modernization. But I think some business people don't understand how much of a culture shift and how much of the patterns and the way of working can change significantly. So talk more about how you see those things changing, not just release times shortening down, but what does it look like for the business to adopt those new modern practices?
Yeah, so I think the metrics are crucial. Every modernization investment should be contributing to certain kind of business metrics. I don't want to give too much away about the company I'm currently working for. Nothing sensitive, but I'll talk in generals, let's say. So some things might be around customer efficiency. So it takes a week to onboard a customer. Let's get that down to a day or an hour. There might be some manual steps involved. Let's try and automate the whole onboarding process, for example. Could be around customer support. It could be like for every 100 transactions placed on your platform, there's like 5 customer support tickets, and that can get very expensive and that can stop your business scaling. So I think, all kinds of metrics, either customer facing or internal efficiency, modernization should be supporting those in some way.
So what does it change for the developer experience? That's the next thing, because I think you can see significant improvements from I write code in this old way and it takes 6 weeks or a month or whatever it is for our release cycle. And I know I won't see my code in production until after it goes through that round of testing and that release, versus I can have my code deployed in minutes. And that's, like you said, it blows people away. They don't realize just how different it is. And that gets to developers behave differently when they have that different expectation of how soon their stuff is out in production, don't they?
Yeah, in my career, it's definitely when you have a reliable way of quickly getting code into production, there's less bureaucracy, there's less need to estimate things, and the whole process becomes more efficient. When I first moved to London almost 15 years ago, I worked at one company and we had this release process, and it would be like 2 or 3 days of manual testing. And there was a lot of safeguards in the process, a lot of checks, a lot of inefficiencies. And then I went to work for a company called 7 Digital, and we were clicking one-click deployments to production every day. We would come to work in the morning, someone's raised a bug. Okay, let's just fix that bug, deploy it to production before we go for our mid-morning coffee break, and then carry on with the work we were supposed to do. When you have that super efficient pipeline, you can quickly make changes like that. You don't have all of these games about trying to get work put into the backlog and deployed for the next sprints or doing some emergency release. So you can be much more responsive to business needs, much more focused on getting work done. Time to market is much faster. And there's other benefits as well in that area, definitely. Hiring and retention, I would say definitely. If you've got some old legacy systems, people can lose motivation, let's say, very quickly working in those kind of environments. Whereas if you're using modern tech, modern approaches, it's much easier to hire really good people.
Yeah, like I said, these all tie in technology benefits, but also a lot of business benefits. And so we were talking about developers get to see their code get deployed faster, but that means they get to solve a customer bug faster. And that's going back to your example of, we get 5 bugs reported for every 100 things released. Well, that's not a problem if you can fix them in minutes. It's a problem if they sit open for 2 weeks.
Yeah, exactly. The cost of fixing bugs gets much lower. Like all the work you do is more efficient. And as another benefit of that, developers typically get to spend a bit more time thinking about the products, being involved in the domain itself. So they become more knowledgeable about your business, able to contribute more to actually improving the product and solving problems, and less figuring out how to get things in production or test things that don't really add too much value.
So if we go through an architecture modernization journey, are we ever done? Or is this sign that there's always, like once you've started the path, you just keep finding ways to continually improve the architecture?
Yeah, I mean, continuous improvement is crucial. In terms of modernization, is it done? I would say there's not really an end date in most cases. I would say the amount of time people talk about modernization just goes down until it's not that important anymore. And there's a blurry line between modernizing and not modernizing. But sometimes you've got clear milestones like get out of the data center onto the cloud. Once that's been achieved, you've hit a big milestone. And people might think, oh yeah, modernization's done at that point, but you might have done a lot of lift and shift to get there. And so you still might be actually improving the architecture itself, might be investing a lot after that. So yeah, there's normally not like a party at the end where it's all done. It kind of just, people stop talking about it, even if there is still bits of modernization going on, I would say.
Yeah, I think that was actually one of the talks at QCon London last month, was about a modernization. They had to do a lift and shift first to get into the cloud, and then they could start refactoring. But if they tried to refactor all their code once into the cloud, it was going to take so long, they would have lost their customers who were asking for a cloud-based solution rather than on-prem solution, because it was COVID times and no one was going into the office anymore. They couldn't access the software. They needed it cloud-based. So sometimes it is a two-step process. And so I like that you're talking about the project maybe initially get us out of the data center, get us into the cloud, but the process is ongoing. And my next question was going to be, are there ever prerequisites, either technical or organizational, before a company can start on their modernization journey? And the one that came to mind was having a product-led mindset as opposed to a project mindset.
I think even that one is, you could challenge that one. I think there are a lot of companies that don't really have a clear strategy. Like where I'm working at Payfit now, the business strategy is very clear, and it's very obvious how some big improvements in the architecture over the next few years will enable that. In some companies, it can be the opposite. It can be, yeah, we might move into some new countries. You get the chief product officer who's talking about, yeah, we're going to move into new countries. But the CEO's like, no, we probably won't do that. And so on the technical side, you're like, what are we trying to achieve here? You might not have this clear strategy, but you might still modernize in a way where when they do have more clarity on the strategy, you'll be able to respond. It's a difficult situation because you might optimize things that actually aren't that useful to how the company grows in the future. You might end up modernizing some legacy that just gets thrown away because it's not needed anymore. So I wouldn't say that's a prerequisite, but if you do have a very compelling business need and you can actually say, look, the business has this specific objective to achieve. The business knows it can double, triple, quadruple revenue, but we can't do that with the current system. That's easy mode, I would say, because you know what you need to modernize to achieve the business goals. So it's not a prerequisite, but I would say definitely do your homework, put a lot of effort, because if you can get clarity on the strategy, then it will make your modernization much easier. You're not guessing, what are we trying to optimize for? Where's the company going? You've got those clear benchmarks. So not a prerequisite, but I would say that one is something I would focus on as much as possible. I think the other prerequisite is having the skills in-house. Sometimes I feel sorry for these teams. Some new leaders come in, or the company's got some ambition and they're going to modernize. And it's like these developers who've been working in a monolith in this more classical way of working, companies, right, now you've got to modernize all this stuff and we've got to be able to innovate much faster in the next couple of years. If you haven't been modernizing systems, if you've just worked in one legacy system, fixing bugs, adding small features, it's very difficult you just don't have the skills or experience, basically. So I think recognizing what skills need to be brought in-house. I'm not saying hire consultants or partner with consultancies. I think that there are different strategies there, definitely multiple ways to achieve that. But usually you need to bring in some outside help, external help. And also kind of a counterpoint to that one is bringing in outside help. They can't do all of that by themselves in any situation. I think a definite prerequisite for me is you need to put aside time and money for learning and training and upskilling of your employees. Having the business narrative that drives the strategy and investing in upskilling the people, I would say probably those are the two most important.
You don't want to bring in a consultant to do the work of the 10 people you have. You want them to make the 10 people you have start working in that modernization mindset.
Yeah, exactly, 100%. Bringing in people who have the skills you want and using them in a way where you have those skills in your company so you're not dependent on those consultants. But, there's always edge cases and different scenarios. You could hire a consultancy to come in and build something and show what's possible. but I would only treat that as a very short-term solution. I wouldn't do that for the whole project.
When you're doing this, what do you like to see for team structures? I know team topologies gets mentioned a lot. Is that something that you're finding people don't have a team topologies mindset? They don't have stream-aligned teams if they're doing that monolithic legacy development, and you think they should have it for doing more modern work?
Yeah, I'm quite lucky in that respect. My views maybe aren't representative of what other people would find, but because I've been talking about domain-driven design a lot, people normally come to me at the point where that's something they want to achieve. We want to have these different domains owned by different teams so we can have different backlogs and have those teams all working independently. Yeah, for me, people have already made that decision that we need to have teams that can work more independently, applying concepts like DDD and team topologies.
Also, you said you've been brought in as a consultant, but is that one of those, here's how we're going to build the new system and here's how we're going to change? Like, you have to look at the whole picture. It's not, here's how we write code on the new tech stack. It's also, we're going to change some of how we do our day-to-day work. And that, again, takes in business buy-in as well to get new processes that maybe don't have the bureaucracy you used to have.
Yeah, definitely 100%. Changing those old processes can be very, very ingrained and difficult. And you get companies where you've got someone who's responsible for this long, complex release process that involves manual sign-offs and approvals. And they're like, well, in this vision you're proposing, do I even have a job? So you encounter situations like that. There's all kinds of frictions and difficulties. But to answer your point, I would say that's definitely one of the things that people don't think about or not aware of or don't anticipate up front. So yeah, can we modernize? Can we change our organization structure? But in terms of how you prioritize work, how you estimate things, how you release things, all those discovery and delivery processes, sometimes they're not really ready to change those things. It can also be around, I would say, the budgeting and finance is always an interesting area. Like I worked with one company and they wanted to modernize, build this platform, but the platform team had no budget. The only way the platform team could get money to build stuff was if there was another team in the company who asked them to build something and gave them some of their budget. And so the platform team had no autonomy. They weren't able to have a more long-term perspective. It was very much like they were just like an internal outsourcing provider. They just get told what to build, how to build it. And the leadership of the company thought that was a good approach, a good idea. They didn't see why that wouldn't work, why that wasn't effective. So yeah, some things can be quite ingrained. Can we go from processes, compliance, bureaucracy, funding and finance, budget, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, touches almost everything really.
And so when you're trying to do this, are there any key techniques? I mean, we mentioned team topologies. Are there other tools or techniques or processes that you would recommend? And what are the benefits of using those?
To be honest, this might not sound like a great answer. I wasn't always good at this. Maybe I'm still not good at this, but I think just having good relationships with people. One thing I've learned over 15 years is if you just build good relationships with people, you can solve a very hard problem sometimes by just going to lunch together. When I worked with one company, there was a head of IT. He'd been there for quite a while. I was proposing new ideas, tried to be polite. We didn't have a great relationship. And then after 6 months, someone said to me, oh yeah, he's been saying some stuff about how you did some good work together. I'm like, oh, that just seemed like any other meeting I had with him. But basically, after 6 months, something changed in him where he was like, I kind of trust that Nick guy now. Yeah, he's not so bad after all. And after that point, having some of the deeper, more difficult conversations became a lot easier. So I don't know if it's the answer you're looking for, but if I could say, if there were no silver bullets, but if there was a silver bullet, I would definitely say building good relationships with all the stakeholders involved, learning about what they're working on, what their challenges are, what their problems are, just being someone that they trust. And then when you do have these difficult moments, difficult conversations, at least they respect you and trust you on a personal level and might be willing to open up more with you, give you the benefit of the doubts, those kind of human aspects.
Yeah, nothing can beat having good trusting relationships. If you aren't trusted, especially in your case of coming in as a consultant or new to an employer and you're saying, I'm going to switch stuff up, that can be jarring if they don't say, I trust him to be able to go and switch stuff up. My final question, I wanted to end on kind of a curveball. So architects are familiar with making trade-offs. If we go down this modernization path, what are some of the things that we'd be giving up?
You mean, what would the architects be giving up?
Not just from an architecture perspective, but let's say it's the business deciding we're going to prioritize this architecture modernization work for the next 18 months, 2 years. What are some of the trade-offs? They're saying we're going to do this instead of what? What's the trade-off?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Well, this is the name of the game, really. Modernization is about taking some short-term, I would like to say pain, but let's say compromises. You're reducing the things you deliver now so that you can do more in the future. So I think it's all about compromises. It's all about maybe you don't fix those bugs, maybe you don't build those new features, maybe you don't expand into a new country, but you wait for a year or 2 years, and now you can expand into 4 countries and operate at scale more effectively. So, yeah, I think the compromises usually come on the product side, usually not adding more features, I would say.
Yeah, that seems to be the answer usually when it comes to tech debt is I need to work on my tech debt. That means I'm not working on features, but this is that to, a whole nother order of magnitude potentially of we're going to be doing a big tech debt rewrite, for lack of a better term, and trading off the business is not going to get stuff for a little while.
Sometimes it's not features, sometimes it's like whole new products or expanding into new countries. Like we're going to put on hold this big business initiative, not just the features in the backlog, but something quite big and significant.
Yeah, not just one little bug. Yeah, so if you have to trade off, we don't get to do that big win, that big objective right now, but you're going to make it easier for me to do more of those in the future instead of, well, one country now and then one country next year. If you wait 2 years, maybe I'll give you 5 countries much more easily.
Yeah, and the thing is, a lot of the time it might look like you're compromising or sacrificing, but a lot of those projects might not have been feasible anyway. See this sometimes, you get 6 months in or a year in and you're like, wow, trying to do this rollout to a new country on our existing architecture, it's just gone completely not as we expected. It's more expensive. We're hitting all these kind of problems in edge cases. We get more support tickets than we thought. So you might even feel like you're compromising, but you're not actually compromising in some cases.
Yeah, I think someone pointed out to me one time, it's not that if we go down path A versus path B, one is going to take a longer timeline to get there. It was, if we go down path A, we cannot get to our destination. We have to switch to path B.
Absolutely, yeah. In some cases, it's just not possible to get there with the current system.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap things up. Nick, thanks again for talking with me today. If people want to follow you or see you, are you going to be at conferences or anywhere in the future? How can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, I'm normally at quite a few conferences. I'm doing a few less this year, so probably you can follow me on LinkedIn. I put all my notifications there.
And then listeners, we hope you'll join us again for another episode of the InfoQ podcast.